Please, everybody, stand up. Hello. So unfortunately, I won't be talking about Bundler that Richard alluded to, but I will be talking about a little bit about Rescue. But let me be the first person to welcome you to Israel's. I was kind of disappointed when Fogel invited me to this conference and realized it was called Rails Israel and not Israel's. But he has the domain, so for next year, we'll get it. But I also like to special thanks to Fogel and Deborah for organizing this conference. It's been pretty awesome so far. So, so most of you guys probably know who this is. Constantine alluded to him. He's been a pretty influential person in my Ruby career. And like Richard is doing, I think you should follow this Twitter account, GorbyPuff, and this is his awesome cat. He posts really awesome cat pictures. And so I'm like super nervous right now upstage, and one of the things Aaron does before all his talks is he puts up this slide of Freddie Mercury, and in the caption it says, "What would Freddie Mercury do?" And he looks at it, and it helps him calm down and get through the talk. So based off of his cat, because he sent me this really awesome picture, what would GorbyPuff do? His cat's name is Gorbachev Puff Puff Thunderhorse. So I look at this picture, and I did this in Finland, and it helps me calm down a little bit so I can get through my talk. So another tradition that Aaron started that I really liked was he would, every Friday he would take a picture of himself hugging his web camera like this and tweet it around the world, and people would tweet back. And I thought this was just like a great way to sort of impose positive energy in our community, because it's so easy to sort of get bogged down by like all the negative things on like why Rails sucks or all these other things that are problematic in the community. And I know today isn't Friday, but as I've gone around to different conferences around the world, I've gone and taken pictures of the conferences of everyone doing a Hug Friday picture. So if everyone could stand up and participate in this, and you sort of just go like this, Richard will go and take a picture for us. Ready? There's like panorama mode, bro. Thanks, guys. So I don't know how much time that took out of my talk, but I'm Terence. I'm this guy. I'm not quite as awesome as this picture imposes. I come from Austin, Texas, also known as the taco capital of the world. They make these really awesome tacos. If you're ever in Austin, look Richard I up, and we will hook you up with these tacos. Pretty awesome. I work on some open source stuff, Bundler and Rescue, as people mentioned before, and also am a big contributor to Rails Girls. I've gone around and coached with that. And Rails Girls, if you haven't heard of it, is this nonprofit movement to get women excited about technology, and totally behind that. As people mentioned before, I'm the senior Ruby engineer at Heroku. That means I just run the Ruby platform for Heroku, so I do both working on open source tooling to enable both our internal teams to build better software, as well as our customers out there, as well as dealing with all the integration points between the open source community and Heroku. And I would like to thank Heroku for, I guess, paying me money to like work on open source, so that's pretty cool. And you can tweet at me at Hone02. Like Richard said, I'm Hone on GitHub, and then Terence at Heroku.com if you want to email me. Feel free to contact me with any questions related to open source, Heroku, or if you just want to say hi. Totally receptive for all that. So on today's agenda, I'll be going over resque really quickly just to make sure we're all on the same page in case you haven't heard of it before or you haven't seen it being used in a while. I'll be digging to some of the internals really briefly, so it'll be helpful there. And then I'll talk about, I guess, my story of how I took it over, and after that, I'll be talking about some closing thoughts about like my experiences of running the project, and then if there is time, maybe I'll have a bonus round where I'll talk about some stuff from resque too, like some of the internals about concurrency and stuff. But I guess we'll see. A lot of the stuff will touch on stuff from Danish's talk this morning, where we've talked about various things about maintaining stuff in the open source community. So resque, what is resque? I'm sure most of you have heard of it before, but it's a Redis-backed queuing solution. So it allows you to run things in the background, commonly for like getting things out of your web requests or other things that you want to run. And this is how you define a simple job. You just have a class. You need to set this instance variable queue and set it to some type of symbol for the queue name, and then define this class method perform here, and then pass in parameters and have it do its work there. And then to enqueue a job, you just call the enqueue class method on the resque module, pass the class that we just defined, which is the job name and parameters that perform takes. And then to run it, you simply just run rake resque work, and then you pass in an environment variable that contains all the queues that you want this particular process to work off of. You can use asterisk to say all the queues, or you can use a comment separated list essentially to specify a certain set of queues. So back last year, about a year ago, is when I probably first started getting into resque. There were some integration issues with Heroku and resque. If you've used Heroku or resque on Heroku, I'm sure you're probably aware of some of this stuff. And I got asked to take a look at it. So I started contributing working on some patches and stuff. And I got talking to Defunct, who is the creator of resque. And we got talking, and in January, he asked me if I wanted to take over the project, which I said yes to, not really knowing what I was getting into. At this point in my career, I was like maintaining Bundler for about a year and a half with the help of Yehuda and Andre, and I figured resque is a much smaller project. There's a lot less lines of code. Like, how complicated could it get? But those were my famous last words. So when he transferred the project to me, the only comment he really said to me was, Groupon uses resque, don't break Groupon. And that was pretty much his only advice. And then he sent me this email that just said, good luck, and letting me know that I had commit bit on the GitHub repo and I could release the gem. So to sort of go over like what has happened, I guess, around, like from today to that point in history, like I'm sort of gonna go over quickly all the releases that have happened since then. So resque 1.19.0 was the last release Defunct released, and that was in September 2nd, 2011. Unfortunately, he merged a handful of pull requests and other things into master and decided not to release a gem with those changes. So within a month after me taking over the project, resque 1.20 was sort of that release, just pushing out the changes that were on master and making sure like the test passed. And then I got excited about working on some new features for resque. I wanted to fix up a bunch of internal stuff. One of the things I really hated about the project was every single class extended and included this helpers module, which meant that it was both an instance and class level method, like everything defined that module, and that kind of drove me crazy. So part of it has been just trying to rework some of that stuff. And then if you fast forward to July 3rd, I released resque 21.0, which, if you notice, was not resque 2, but Redis RB 3.0 came out, and a lot of people really wanted the new functionality. It did better error handling and failure detection and stuff. And if you're using resque in your Rails project, the old versions of resque would lock you down to some version of 2. which meant you couldn't use this Redis client, which was much better. So it was important to get that release out. And then on August 21st, I released Rescue 122, which was the work that I started over a year ago on some of the signal handling stuff we've been doing. So in order to get a better idea of like what this is, we have to talk a little bit about POSIX signal handling. Normally in Unix processes, you have these two signals, sigquit and sigterm. And when you have sigquit, usually when you pass sigquit to a Unix process, you want it to exit immediately and produce a core dump so you can analyze it or do whatever you want with it, load in GDB, what have you. And then when you pass in sigterm, you're asking the process to shut down nicely and give it some time to clean up after itself. And then if it takes too long, you sort of pass sigkill and kill it. So Unix usually sends sigterm when you shut down operating system, and then give it some time, and then you send sigkill. But unfortunately, resque sort of did the reverse here. So sigquit is you wait for the child to finish processing the current job, and then you exit. And then sigterm, it just killed the child immediately with no rhyme or reason. And this caused a bunch of havoc on Heroku and didn't really play nice in the Unix and signal handling world. So in 1.2.2, we tried to change that. So now in resque, you can define this rescue block here, and it raises this rescue term exception. And what this does is it allows you to sort of have this cleanup code. So if at any point the job you're working on gets termed, you can add in cleanup code here that will get executed during that process instead of just like dying. And by default, we give you 4 seconds to sort of clean up after yourself, and if not, we sigkill that process. So I'll go through some examples of showing how to use this. And because rescue follows Semver, we can't just sort of replace signal handling in a minor version, in a minor release, because like some people might be expecting the old signal handling to work the way it is. So by default, it just performs like it used to. So when we pass sigterm, you see that it just exits and kills the child immediately, like what you would expect. But with the new signal handling code, and to enable it, you just set this term child 1 as an mvar, and then rescue will pick it up. So when you see when we send sigterm there to the child, you see that it prints that "oh my god, job cleaned up" line, and then you see that the process actually exits cleanly here, because the job finishes processing. And if you remember from the rescue code block from before, we actually had a 2-second sleep. So you can sort of change how long you want that timeout to be, how long you want to wait before you send a sigkill. And if we set it to shorter than the amount of time it actually takes to happen, so we set it to 1 here, we see when we send a term signal, it takes too long, so then we kill it. And then you don't see the put statement. So that was sort of like I guess like up to August-ish time frame for me. And at that point, I was sort of learning a lot of things about maintaining an open source project on my own. So the first thing I learned, it's like a lot of work. And I definitely did not realize that going in. Like I thought it wouldn't be too hard. I would just have to fix like 1 or 2 bugs. But I didn't realize the amount of technical debt and number of issues that I inherited going into the project. And then I was doing it solo, which was really hard. Like it makes it really hard to both do feature development and then fix things that are important to people running real apps in production. Because no one really cares about Rescue 2 until it's out. But people do care about their current running systems in production. So trying to find a balance in there by yourself when you're not being paid full time to work on this particular project is pretty hard. So one of the things I realized was that I need to build a team around this open source project. And I couldn't really move the project forward where I wanted to go by myself. And other things besides getting help to do different things is when you're working on a project by yourself, you usually have this tunnel vision. You don't get a chance to talk to as many people. You don't get a chance to bounce different ideas off of others. and you sort of just work on the things that you're focused on. So for me, for a long time, it was just I was working on stuff for Rescue 2, and I wasn't really paying attention to as many of the issues as I should have been for Rescue 1. And a lot of people just thought Rescue was a dead project, which it wasn't. And then, like I said before, you can get people working on different things to help you work towards a single release or other milestones in the project, and all working towards a common goal, which is really nice. So like at work, you work on teams that achieve different things. And then another nice thing is you can specialize in stuff. So you can get people who do various things and can really help on certain fronts on the project. So when I went to Frozen Rails, I gave a Rescue talk, and I sort of talked about some of the stuff that I did before in this talk, as well as some of the roadmap stuff for Rescue 2. And Steve came up to me and was super excited about Rescue, and he was like, hey, how do I come and help? And he single-handedly has been probably one of the most helpful people on this project, and I'm super happy to have him aboard. He is great at engaging with the community, and then over the span of 3 days, he knocked down the issue tracker from 150 issues to, I guess I took the screenshot this morning, and it's down to 30, and then we're down to less than 10 pull requests, and it was above 50 back in September. So he's done a phenomenal job. So if you ever volunteers to help out with your open source project, I would definitely take it. And so a lot of the stuff that has gone out in Rescue 1, 2, 3, which came out, has been work from pull requests and other things from the community, which has helped sort of invigorate the momentum behind the project again. And a lot of that's thanks to Steve. And then the next person who has stepped up a lot to help has been Tony. And so Tony works at Living Social. You probably know him from work like Celluloid. And one thing that when you have an open source project is you should get companies to invest. And I don't just mean like investing dollars or something like that, but like real stakeholders who are using your project, who use it in production and have it at certain scales that you probably can't use. So like an example is Living Social, when it did the Starbucks deal, had 2 million jobs backed up in its queue using Rescue. And they probably use it for way more things than they should. But like the amount of feedback and information you can get from a company that's using it in production and someone who's invested in helping out the project is totally invaluable. So when you're building out new features or you're fixing bugs, you can totally ask these guys and get like feedback from real users and have a really tight feedback loop. So that has been really helpful on the project. And in addition, they probably have other needs that the project is not meeting, so they forked the project and have built other features. So in Rescue 1.2.4.0, which is coming out pretty soon once I get a chance to test it, one of the things that Tony did was instead of using the current logging system, we've moved over to using standard logger. So back in the current release of Rescue, we just like put stuff out to standard out, which is really ghetto. And then you have to set these like verbose and very verbose flags to get any output at all. And so in Rescue 1.2.4.0, we're going to have this logger accessor on the module, and then by default we'll set it to just use the standard library logger, log to standard out like it is in 1.2.3.0, and then just have this quiet formatter to sort of mimic how that works in the older versions of Rescue. And then you can use the severity levels to denote like how those things should work. So you can use rescue logger.info now. And then we've also stubbed out the method so it works the way it used to. You also notice that there's like this log method is also an instance variable on the rescue worker. Like, why shouldn't I be able to log anywhere inside rescue? So I don't actually know the architecture decision behind this, but it seems bad. So we've changed that going forward. The other thing is, so at Living Social, they have a lot of different queues, and if you like currently Rescue only has one failed queue, and so no matter what queue it comes from, all the failures go to that particular queue, and it can be hard to debug if you're like looking at a particular job failure. So what Tony has done is he has implemented multiple failure queues, so each failure will go into that specific queue, so you can dig down and sort of analyze why like that particular queue is producing a bunch of failures. And the other person who has been helped out a lot for me has been Aaron, and he's been helping me a lot with a bunch of the resque-2 work. So we've been working on ActiveQ, which is the Rails 4 implementation of being generic about queuing. I was told I had 10 minutes, like 5 minutes ago, so I probably can't go through this. But essentially, it uses a unified queuing interface. So this is the interface from standard library, but there's a push and pop thing. So you just push jobs onto the queue, and then you pop them from your worker. Go through this stuff. And then, so another major feature that we're working really hard on is as Rails 4 moves more towards using threading outside the box, and as we have just really good alternative VMs that do not have GILs like JRuby and Rubinius that are coming out and are starting to mature, like the thought of using threaded workers becomes more and more relevant to maximize the kind of box you want to use. And as well as MRI, like a lot of people's jobs are IO based. So we're working on implementing threaded workers inside resque-2. We're running like threaded executables. I have a bunch of those slides in the bonus round, which I won't be able to get to, but if you want to look at sort of the prototypes of what we're building, you can go look there. Another thing we want to do is we want to extract resque-web into a separate gem. We think that resque-core and resque-web should be 2 separate gems. People should be able to use resque-web outside of the resque project and sort of make that interface clean and make it really easy to use resque-web. And the people who are interested in resque-web tend to be a different set of people than the people who are working on the internals of resque-core. And then we want to also implement durable queues. So currently in resque, when you pop a job off, it's in flight, and then if that worker dies at any point, you sort of lose track of that job. So we want to keep track of the jobs that you're working on. So if workers do die, we can requeue them or have some way to know what kind of jobs were like stopped in mid-process. So those are all the major features that Aaron's been helping me out with for resque-2. So some closing thoughts. So a lot of this builds on top of what Danish was talking about. So one of the first things to do is when you start maintaining an open source project, you should start looking for your replacement. Like Danish was saying, you don't have time, or you're not going to be interested in this project forever, most likely, and you're going to want to move on, and you don't want to leave it in this open source graveyard where you have a bunch of people who depend on it in production, and there's no one actually maintaining it or looking after it, and you just leave it to rot. And so Danish talked about this contributing MD file, so I'll go over quickly what I think has been helpful to put into it. This is stuff that we've been putting into Bundler, which has been helpful. So the first thing is like talking about what team members you have. So who's on your team, how do you get in contact with them? Just really helpful for the community when they want to reach out to people. Where to get help, so like mailing lists, if you use an IRC channel, if you have a separate site, so for Bundler we have gembundler.com where you get documentation. If you use man pages, stuff like that is really helpful for people who are interested in just like finding out more about the project. Talking about how you actually implement a new feature. So for instance, in Rails, they don't actually like you opening issues for new features. They would rather have you discuss this on the mailing list and then like send a pull request after it's been discussed. So knowing that kind of stuff ahead of time is really helpful when implementing a project. But maybe you don't care and you just want to track it all in GitHub issues, or maybe you use a different tracker altogether. How to file and triage bugs. So I think a lot of open source projects get really crappy bugs, so sort of describing how like to actually file a bug. So a common thing I like to do is like, I like users to tell me what they did so I can reproduce it, tell me what they expect, and then tell me what they're actually seeing. So this way I have like pretty good context of what they're trying to do and like what they don't think is right or what's happening that's wrong. And other things, you can ask people to actually help out with triage. So if you can have an issue team like Rails does, or you can ask people to comment on issues like, hey, I can reproduce this bug, or anything you want people to do with bugs. If you do any beta testing or pre-releases, you can talk about that process here. If you have a separate website for documentation or updating man pages, you can have a section on how you actually contribute to that. Like for Bundler, we have a totally separate repo that is the gembundler.com site, and there's a whole different process for contributing to that. And then the most important thing, I think, is like having documentation on how, if someone wants to fix their first bug or like make their first like pull request to the project, like how do you go about doing that? Who do you go to talk to for help, and how you get help making that happen? Because this is definitely the most daunting process. And something that's been really successful for me has been this master-apprentice model. I've been pretty lucky because I've had some pretty good mentors over the last 2 years. So when I first started on Bundler, Yehuda and Carl took an interest in me, and they helped me sort of work through Bundler back in the early days of just like getting the test running, making the test pass, and then slowly as I've gotten more comfortable with the code base, I've had to talk to them less except for higher level things. And that's just been really successful in like making sure someone actually is an active contributor to a project. And then of course, Aaron has been super helpful with everything with Rails and Resque as well. And sort of having someone you can bounce questions off of and get help on these projects that are really hard when you're solving hard problems is really nice. And I saw this tweet this morning, Charles tweeted it, and it says, "My #1 recommendation for getting people to contribute to open source is directly ask them to work on something. People like to feel needed." And I think this is really important in the previous model, just like assigning someone a task that they can do, and that really focuses the questions they're gonna ask, and you can really work on concrete things, and they're not really asking like high in the pie, spacey stuff. And then as they start to get more comfortable with the project, you'll see them doing less things. So one of the things Aaron does, he assigns me homework when we work on Resque sometimes. Like we'll pair on things, then he'll ask me to finish stuff, or he'll just assign me a whole book to read if I need to learn more about some theory. So like right now I'm reading Practical Concurrency with Java, because I guess Java solved all our problems like 20 years ago. So in summary, don't underestimate the amount of work it takes to maintain an open source project. It's really easy to abandon them. But don't fret, like you should build a team around it if you need help or get people to help you. There's tons of people out there who are looking for projects to work on and they don't know what to work on. And you should like find them, people who are active through issues or just talking and meeting people at conferences. It's been pretty amazing for me going around, just like the amount of people willing to help on different projects that I work on. So build a team, and then make sure to start mentoring your replacement, because you're not going to be working on this project forever. So it's good to find that person who's going to be that person you trust when you want to step away and you don't want your project to rot forever. That's all I had. Thanks. Time for questions? No. Yeah, do people have questions? Constantine. We will not be using the actor model, but I actually have no idea. I haven't really looked at Sidekick, but I mean, I assume it'll be pretty comparable, but thanks, bro. So we've been working with some of the Ruby Gems team. So I've been doing some recent work on the Bundler API. And one of the things we want to do is have an incremental index that we've been working on, and then have Bundler be able to cache that, or even just Ruby Gems. So that's definitely something that we're looking at. But do you mean like beyond the dependency? Like you actually want to cache like all the gems on the mirror, or just like the index? Well, so all the gem information's actually, so besides the API, all the gem information's on CloudFront. So as far as I know, Amazon has servers all around the world for CloudFront. So like the actual gem should not actually take that long to download compared to anywhere else in the world. Yeah, I mean, you can, I probably need to get off, but you can come talk to me afterwards. I'd be more than happy to go into more details on that.